It's time. It's time to finish your wife. I couldn't believe what I heard. It was my mother-in-law. I happened to overhear the conversation between my husband and his mother. They were planning to harm me. Why? After hearing the conversation, I pretended that I did not hear a thing. With my father's help, I gathered the evidence of their plan for my murder. Until I had sufficient proof, I remained patient and lived with my husband and his mother. Later, they were charged for what they did. My name is Jen. I am a 28-year-old housewife who lives with my husband and his mother. My husband, Ken, was a 32-year-old office worker. He was very close with his mother. They were so close, it made me uncomfortable. Even after we got married, my husband and his mother often went out for dinner or went on vacation together, just the two of them. Which one was your wife, Ken? At first, I didn't understand why Ken did everything with his mother, not with me. I didn't mind that my husband and his mother were close, but it was beyond a normal mother and son relationship. I understood Mary felt lonesome since she lost her husband, but how about me? I was lonely and I was her son's wife. My mother-in-law, Mary, seemed pretty happy with her life. She didn't get jealous or upset at me. That's because Mary always came first in her household. I didn't think Mary had much interest in getting to know me. She didn't talk to me much, nor did she treat me like a daughter-in-law. I felt uncomfortable at first, but I realized it was easier. I had nothing to talk with her about anyways. It was kind of nice that I didn't have to make a conversation with her. So, I stopped paying much attention to my mother-in-law. She treated me as if I didn't exist, like air. I thought we were fine as long as we didn't meddle in each other's business. My husband was a kind person. He helped me around the house a lot. I married him because of his kindness. Usually, housework was the wife's job, especially if you lived with in-laws. But Ken was different. He helped me so much with a variety of chores. I was very grateful. Having a very helpful husband who lives with his parents was pretty rare, I thought. However, Ken had a big flaw. He was addicted to gambling. He often went gambling on horse racing or slot machines. He usually came home with no money left. Even after spending all the money he had, he couldn't stop gambling. We had no savings. We were barely getting by. I wanted to have children, but I was not sure if we would have enough money to raise a child. One day, after a few years of our marriage, my mother-in-law asked me impatiently why she didn't have a grandchild yet. I have been waiting patiently. Where is my grandchild? She asked. But mother, I said, Ken spends everything he makes on gambling. I don't think we have enough money saved to have a child. Do you worry too much? It will work out, Mary said. No. Money is important. It costs a lot of money to raise a child. If you keep saying that, soon you will be too old to have one, Mary said sarcastically. Our financial situation is too unstable to have a child right now, I told her. Then I will never see my grandchild, Mary shouted. As we were talking, our conversation got heated and ended up in a big argument. After we had this big fight, I stopped talking to her. We just looked the other way when we saw each other. We didn't interact much before, but at least we were polite to each other. It was not just plain indifference between us anymore. My relationship with Mary was getting worse, and it got harder to live with her. Ken noticed that his mother and I were not getting along. Well, Mom, a child is a gift from heaven. We just need to be patient. Jen, do not worry, we will have a child someday. It was my fault. He apologized for his gambling habit. Of course I wanted my own children. The reason I hesitated to have one was because of Ken's gambling habit. If only he quit gambling completely and started saving money, Ken was on my side, but never said he would quit gambling. I was sad, but I was also happy that he told his mother not to blame me. He was always kind like that. After having this conversation, Mary stopped asking me about a baby. As a married woman without a child, when are you having a baby? Was the hardest thing to be asked. So I was happy Mary stopped asking me. I thought Mary had given up wishing for her grandchild. I usually slept deep and slept through the night. But one night, I woke up, shivering. It was late autumn, and the temperature plunged that night. I got up to get a blanket. I thought I might catch a cold otherwise. With my phone's flashlight, I went downstairs. Then I noticed the living room light was on. I couldn't see well at first. It was too bright for my sleepy eyes. But as my eyes adjusted to the bright light, I saw Ken and his mother in the room. My phone showed it was past 2 in the morning. I wondered what they were doing in the middle of the night. "Almost there," my husband, Ken, said to his mother. Not knowing what they were talking about, I squatted down and listened. As I was listening, It's time. It's time to finish your wife." I heard Mary's voice. Surprised, I pressed my phone to record the conversation. My husband was talking in his usual calm, kind voice. I almost forgot to breathe while listening. "I told you before, it is too obvious to put the poisonous mushroom in her food at home. Police will be called and we will be investigated. We don't want to get caught, right? So my plan is, we take her mushroom hunting, and we accidentally pick the wrong mushroom. It must look like an accident. Do not hurry, Mom. If the police find out we poisoned Jen intentionally, we won't be eligible to receive her life insurance. I need to pay back all my debt with the money." I couldn't believe what I heard. It was my husband, talking in his usual soothing, kind tone to his mother. But what he was telling her horrified me. I knew he had bought a very pricey life insurance policy on me after we got married. I remembered wondering why he bought such an expensive policy, since its monthly payments were very high for our financial situation. I speculated that this was his plan from the beginning. Was he planning to murder me for insurance money all this time? I was so shaken, I felt ill. I cupped my hand over my mouth. I felt like throwing up. I don't remember how I made it back to my bed. I couldn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. What Ken was saying to his mother was on repeat in my head. Next morning, after sending Ken to work, I thought about my father. He was a police officer. After making sure my mother-in-law was not in the house, I called my father. "Dad, I need your help. Ken and his mother are trying to harm me. I heard the conversation last night. Could you help me?" I said. "What? Are you at home?" My father, Steve, said. "Yes, I'm home alone." "I will be right there," he said. "Thank you, Dad, be here soon," I told him. He took a day off from his work and came over. Thank you. Thank you for coming here. Please help me. They want to harm me. I couldn't sleep last night. Please help." After listening to my story, he said, "You must be very tired. Were you having trouble with your mother-in-law? You might be emotionally exhausted. Let me take you to see a doctor. They will give you something to sleep. You must be having obsessive thoughts because you are too tired." He didn't believe what I told him. He thought I was not thinking straight. I realized I had to calm down. I had to prove to him it was true. I was not insane. "Dad, listen. I am not crazy. I recorded their conversation last night. It's on my phone. Have a listen." I took out my phone and played the recording. My dad's face changed. His eyes opened wide with anger. "Jen, you are right. I am sorry, I believe you. But this recording itself is not strong enough evidence to arrest them. The only way to prove their criminal intent is to go along with their plan. Listen, Jen. I know you don't want to, but you must go mushroom hunting with them. We need to prove they are guilty. Be patient," he said. "No way, Dad. What if I accidentally eat poisonous mushrooms?" I said. "Don't worry," my dad said. "I will follow you and take pictures. We need strong evidence. Something they can't quibble with. You must be patient. You can do it. I'm believing in you. You promise you will follow us? I trust you." "I am so scared, but I will do it," I said to my father. That was how I decided to pretend that I didn't know anything about my husband and his mother's evil plan. The same night, Ken came home from work and asked me, "Jen, do you want to go mushroom hunting this weekend? My mother and I know a place where there are lots of delicious wild mushrooms. Let's make delicious mushroom soup at the outdoor grill." Here we go, I thought. "Okay, sounds good. I'll go with you too," I said casually. Father knows best. Things were going well according to our plan. Then, the weekend came. I went mushroom hunting with my husband and his mother. We gathered a lot of wild mushrooms and wild vegetables. We started making mushroom soup. It was like a mini camping trip. My husband and his mother seemed to be enjoying themselves. "They are probably thinking about my life insurance money," was all I thought when I looked at them. Ken was grilling a mushroom pizza. He also made wild vegetable fritters. He usually helped me cook dinner, so his cooking was impeccable. It was late autumn. Leaves were in deep red and yellow colors on mountains. It was beautiful, but I couldn't enjoy the scenery. I was too nervous to enjoy the moment. Ken ladled out a big bowl of steaming mushroom soup for me. "This is for you, Jen, doesn't it look delicious?" Ken said with a smile. "Thank you," I said, but in my mind, I was thinking that there must be a poisonous mushroom in it. I can't believe he is smiling and acting so naturally. If I were in his place, there is no way I could do the same. I received a steaming bowl of soup, pretended to eat it, and threw the soup away in a bush behind me. "Do not eat or drink anything at the picnic. Remember, nothing. Be careful," my father told me beforehand. I had to survive. We needed to gather evidence. I didn't want to fall into Ken and his mother's scheme. I felt my phone vibrating. It was a text from my dad. It said, "I got it. Leave the rest to me." As we planned beforehand, I made a move. Oh, no. I just got a text from my family. My dad is in the hospital. I must go right now, I screamed. "What? Must you go right now?" "Eat some food first," Ken said. "Yes, this mushroom soup is so special." "Have some more," Mary said. I ignored both of them and just ran down a mountain road. I ran and ran to get away from them. Then, I saw my father. He was waiting nearby for me. As soon as I saw him, I felt relieved. "You did well, Jen. We've got everything we need. Let's go home," he said. We left the mountain in his car. We had gathered enough evidence to prove their intent to harm me. Soon after, my husband and his mother were arrested for attempted murder. My father recorded a video showing Ken serving destroying angel mushrooms in my bowl. The video and recording of their conversation the other night were filed as evidence with the police. Both recordings were recognized as very strong proof of their intent of the crime. My father told me later that Ken had an enormous amount of debt. He borrowed money anywhere he could to make payments, but it hardly made any dent in his debt. He maxed out all of his credit cards, but the interest itself overwhelmed him. He wondered how he could repay all of his debt in the easiest way. His mother's motive to erase me was that she really wanted a grandchild. Mary wanted her son to divorce me since I showed no will to get pregnant. But in reality, Mary understood it was too difficult to raise a child in his financial situation. In order to solve both of their problems, they came up with this brilliant idea of poisoning me. If everything went according to their plan, he would be debt-free and get a new wife who could give Mary a grandchild. I was just a pawn to be sacrificed for a pile of insurance money. No wonder Ken bought an expensive life insurance policy on me soon after we married. It all made sense. I was just a cash cow for Ken. The thought of my failed marriage put me into a depression. I went back to live with my parents after the mushroom incident. I couldn't take care of myself after the event. I had no will to feed myself unless my parents insisted. I was in a deep depression. I couldn't sleep. When people were talking at night, I heard Ken and Mary talking instead. My emotional turmoil lasted for a long time. Ken and Mary are both in jail. I'm safe, I told myself. I understood it logically but still felt uneasy. My parents took me all over the place to cheer me up. In spring, they took me out for cherry blossom viewing to enjoy nature. The blossoms were beautiful, but I felt nothing. My heart was broken. I went to the ocean in the summer. It was hot. I had some watermelon. I noticed that I actually enjoyed eating. I saw sweat running down my skin. Looking at my own sweat, I felt like I was alive. When autumn came, it reminded me of the horrendous mushroom incident, but I was able to enjoy the changing seasons. I was finding a small joy in my everyday life. I was finally putting my life back together. We humans are so resilient. I was getting over my traumatic experience. One day, I stopped by a cafe and met a guy who worked there. I fell in love with him at first sight. I thought I would never be able to trust a man after what I went through. I didn't believe anyone could fall in love at first sight, but here I was. I couldn't explain it well, but I liked the way he carried himself. I was very attracted to him. When I was with him, I felt relaxed. It felt so natural to be with him. Talking to him made me happy. After I fell in love with him, I was at the cafe every day just to talk to him and flirt with him. I was a different person. Falling in love empowered me and gave me happiness in my life. They say love heals all. That's so true. I kept approaching him. I kept asking him out. Finally, he agreed to go out with me. After dating for a few months, we got married. His parents live in a different part of the country, so I rarely have a chance to see them. We occasionally see them during our summer vacation or Christmas time. My new married life is just the two of us, my husband and I. No more in-laws are living with me. I am helping him at his cafe. I still have a lot to learn from him. We, as husband and wife, help each other to run our cafe together. My new husband is the complete opposite of my ex. He has this impeccable sense of money and business. We live within our means and save money every month. If you don't have a good sense of money, you can't run a successful business. My life has changed completely. I am learning a lot from him. I realize how important it is to have a good partner in one's life. Now, we have a baby just like any other couple. I had completely given up on having a baby in my first marriage, so it is like a dream come true. Becoming a mother without worrying about money is such a relief. It is a baby girl. We considered many names and finally decided to name her Violet. We want her to grow up to be like the flower, beautiful, bright, and cute. My parents were overjoyed holding their first granddaughter. That made me happy. I went through such a horrible experience, but I am now happily living my life with my new husband and my baby girl. I told my mother-in-law who tried to use my bank book without permission. I will give you that bank book, so please feel free to use it. My husband and mother-in-law, who took it at face value, would experience hell. My name is Violet. I am a 30-year-old employee at a company. I live with my husband Joe, whom I married 2 years ago. My husband is a kind and nice man, but he's under the influence of his nearby living mother-in-law, who often causes trouble. My mother-in-law lives alone in her parents-in-law's house. She comes to our house every day to take care of my husband, and my husband relies on her for everything. My mother-in-law also takes care of my husband's laundry, and she cooks meals for both her husband and herself, and they enjoy eating together. However, my mother-in-law never stays overnight at our house. Whenever my husband is at home, his mother-in-law is also there. In this situation, instead of feeling like I'm married to my husband, I feel like I'm witnessing the close relationship between my husband and his parents. Before getting married, my husband, who had always said, "I won't live with my mother-in-law," but his mother has been coming over almost every day. Frustrated, I vented my dissatisfaction to my husband. "You said we wouldn't live with your mother, but this is practically the same as cohabitating." In response to these words, my husband looked surprised and replied, "Why are you so angry? We're not living together just because we're under the same roof." It was futile to say anything to my husband, who considered sharing the same roof and sleeping under it as living together. My mother-in-law doesn't openly bully me, but she constantly uses things in our house and eats them without permission, which is frustrating. She cooks meals for my husband, so I can tolerate her using ingredients for that purpose, but it's a problem when she takes leftover ingredients to her parents' house. She takes all the ingredients from the refrigerator, even the newly bought rice, carrying them all in bags to her parents' house. Since I bought those ingredients with my own money, I ask her to return them, but says, "Oh, these are the things you bought for Joe, right? Since I'm the one cooking anyway, it's fine for me to take them to my house." She said it as if it were obvious. I was disgusted and replied firmly, "Well, what am I supposed to eat then?" With a smirk, my mother-in-law laughed and said, "Oh, that's right. You also need to eat, don't you?" Her intentionally contrived expression made me furious. I was also angry with my mother-in-law, but I became even more dissatisfied with my husband, who always takes her side. Since I strongly objected to the issue of ingredients, I haven't openly brought back all the ingredients to my in-laws' house since then, but they frequently use my things without permission. The other day, as it was getting cold, I searched the closet to put on my down jacket soon, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Thinking that I might have left it at the dry cleaners, I found my mother-in-law wearing my down jacket when she came to our house. "Mother-in-law, that's my down jacket, isn't it?" When I asked, my mother-in-law, wearing a loose-fitting and ill-fitting down jacket, smiled with a satisfied expression. It seemed warm, so I borrowed it. "It suits me perfectly. Can I continue wearing it like this?" Even though my mother-in-law is smaller than me, it seems too big on her. But she liked it so much that she didn't return it to me. It's fine for her to use my things, but if she just told me, I would be okay with it. But, instead, my mother-in-law uses other people's belongings without saying a word. I didn't like her taking liberties with my food and clothes, but her actions continued to escalate even further. Recently, there was a misfortune in my relatives. I prepared to offer condolences by putting money in a mourning envelope. But when I was about to leave for the funeral, the contents of the envelope were gone. I hurriedly asked my husband, "Do you know what happened to the money in the mourning envelope that was here?" "I'm certain I put it in there." Before my husband could answer, my mother-in-law, who had come to visit that day, casually said, "I took that money. If you leave it in a place like that, it'll be stolen by thieves." "You're the thief." I wanted to yell back like that, but I held my composure and replied to my mother-in-law, I need that money now. Could you please return it?" While glaring at me, my mother-in-law said grumpily, "Why should I return it? It's already in my possession, so it's mine." My mother-in-law always says, and if something belongs to someone else but is in her possession, she never returns it. The husband who was present there also sided with his mother-in-law and argued against me. It should be fine like that. It's not a significant amount of money. Certainly, as distant relatives, the condolence money in the envelope was only $20, but it didn't change the fact that he took my money, and I just couldn't accept it. While my husband and I were arguing, my mother-in-law went home, so I clearly said to my husband, "Even if she's your mother-in-law, isn't taking someone else's money considered stealing? You should tell your mother-in-law that too." Unusually, I spoke with conviction, and my husband was overwhelmed, but he immediately defended his mother. "We're family, so don't use words like stealing. Mom is also struggling financially, so please be lenient with her. My mother-in-law lives off the money she earns from her part-time job and the survivor's pension from her deceased husband a few years ago. Most of the meals are eaten at our house, so it shouldn't cost much, and it seemed like my husband gives her money every month, so I thought they were reasonably comfortable. My husband, despite assisting my mother-in-law with money, contributes only a small amount to our household expenses. To be honest, I have been living solely on my salary. Originally, my husband's income was lower than mine, so I thought I would have to shoulder a greater burden to some extent, but I never imagined that I would have to rely entirely on my salary. From that time on, I started to question whether it was okay for me to continue living with my husband. At that moment, another incident occurred that puzzled me even more. When I returned home from work, I was surprised to see my husband and mother-in-law engaged in a serious discussion with a visitor. Observing their serious faces as they listened attentively to a man in a suit explaining something, I had an uneasy feeling for some reason. Since we had never had such visitors before, I became anxious, suspecting that the two of them were plotting something improper. After the visitor left, I cautiously asked my husband about it, filled with fear. "Who is that person right now?" They were speaking with a serious expressions. What were they talking about? For a moment, my husband looked puzzled, but immediately my mother-in-law answered, "It's someone from a housing company." We're thinking of buying a new house. To my mother-in-law, who suddenly mentioned buying a house, I asked in return, "Are you going to rebuild your childhood home? Since my in-laws' house is quite old, it might be a good idea to rebuild it, but I wanted to know where the money would come from." Considering how my mother-in-law is the type to steal condolence money I had prepared, it seemed unlikely that she had any funds for rebuilding a house. However, my mother-in-law said something unexpected. "That house is a rental. We're not rebuilding it. We're planning to buy a newly built house." I was surprised by my mother-in-law's calm demeanor. From her tone, it seemed like she already had the funds prepared to buy a new house, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had been deceived by my mother-in-law all this time. Taking food and money from my home was not because I was struggling to make a living, but simply because I was stingy, and I didn't want to spend my own money, I realized. Even the assistance I received from my husband was for the purpose of saving my own part-time earnings and my late father-in-law's survivor's pension. However, thinking about it that way, it becomes frustrating. In the end, it seems that I was helping my mother-in-law purchase a new house, which is not amusing. At the same time, without saying anything, I became even more furious with my husband, who was assisting my mother-in-law. And I glared at him as if it were someone else's problem. My husband seemed unaware of why I was glaring at him, and he hastily said, "Why are you glaring at me? I have nothing to do with it, right?" Despite claiming to have nothing to do with it, he was discussing with the housing manufacturer together with my mother-in-law, which implies that he intends to live with her in the new house. I didn't want to express my dissatisfaction in front of my mother-in-law, so I kept it to myself, but she spoke up first. "When the new house is built, let's live together, Violet. Thanks to you, we can afford to buy a newly constructed house." Being told that it was thanks to me, I realized that from the beginning, the purpose was to buy a house. If I continue talking to my mother-in-law and husband like this, I feel like I'll lose my temper, so I left the two of them and returned to my room. As I changed clothes and calmly thought about it, I began to wonder if it was possible to buy a newly constructed house with the amount of money my husband assisted with. After all, he only assists about $1,000 per month, and my mother-in-law's part-time job pays only a few $100s per month. It's possible that my father-in-law left behind a considerable inheritance, but he passed away before I got married, so it's unclear how much the inheritance he left. From observing my mother-in-law's lifestyle, it doesn't seem like there's a significant amount left, but considering my stingy mother-in-law, she might have been hiding it from me. Moreover, for me, the prospect of living with my mother-in-law in a newly built house was a major issue, more so than the source of money. Even in the current situation, it's already close to the limit, and if we live together, it seems like she would use all my belongings, and I wouldn't have to bear any living expenses. The house we, as a married couple, currently live in is a rental, but if the newly built house is in my mother-in-law's name, she would likely make sarcastic remarks like, "I'm letting you live here." Of course, all the household chores would be pushed onto me, and considering that, I don't want to live together. My feelings toward my husband were also growing apart, and I had started seriously considering divorcing him. Afterward, the representatives from the housing manufacturer often came to our house to have meetings with my mother-in-law and husband, and it seemed like the discussions were progressing smoothly. I didn't want to be involved, so I didn't participate in the discussions. However, as the housing manufacturer's representative who had finished the meeting with my mother-in-law and others were leaving, they approached me and whispered something in a low voice. "Madam, there's something I'd like to ask you. Do you have a moment?" As my husband and mother-in-law excitedly examined the blueprint of our newly built house, They are completely oblivious to the conversation between me and the representative from the housing company. It's about the funds for constructing the house. Madam, it has been arranged for you to bear the burden. Do you consent to it? Taken aback by this sudden statement, I widen my eyes and ask in disbelief, What are you talking about? The representative then shows me a copy of a document. It's a copy of my savings passbook, showing a balance of $500,000. Even the cover of the passbook was copied. In that instant, I grasped the general idea of my husband and mother-in-law's plan. I responded vaguely to the representative, Well, that passbook is indeed mine. What about it? The representative answers with a relieved expression. That's a relief. I was a bit worried since the lady who would bear the financial burden doesn't participate in any of the meetings. The two always discuss things and say she'll pay in a lump sum once the house is completed. I say to the representative, Don't worry, they will pay in a lump sum, so please don't be concerned. As I watch the representative happily leave, I feel anger welling up inside me, and I make up my mind to seriously consider parting ways with these two. The savings passbook that appeared in the copy held by the person in charge was indeed mine, which I had stored away deep in the back of the closet, thinking I wouldn't use it. Right after getting married, my father passed away, and I temporarily transferred all of his inheritance to my account, using that passbook at the time. While my mother-in-law and husband were excitedly looking at blueprints, I checked inside the closet and, as expected, couldn't find the passbook. The personal seal that was kept together with it was also missing, so I think she took it, mistaking it for the seal for the passbook. Since it was a passbook I didn't use, I had stored it away, but it's terrifying to think that my mother-in-law searched this far. The fact that she searched this deep makes me feel like all of my belongings were thoroughly examined, sending shivers down my spine, and I'm amazed by her persistence. Although my mother-in-law struggled to find the passbook, it was a passbook that couldn't be used. When inheriting my father's inheritance, the heirs were me, my younger brother, and my mother, so for the time being, I deposited all the cash into my account, and later transferred it to my brother's and mother's accounts. At that time, the bank employee recommended a web passbook to me at the counter, so I switched from a paper passbook to a web passbook. According to the bank employee's explanation, with a web passbook, there's no need for a personal seal, there is no risk of the passbook being stolen, and with the smartphone app, I could check my balance anytime, as they said. Since my father unexpectedly left a significant inheritance, I had concerns about managing the passbook, so I followed the bank employee's advice and switched to a web passbook. Afterward, I distributed my father's inheritance to my mother and brother. Recently, my stepmother has been taking my belongings without permission, so I realized later that it was a good decision to switch to a web passbook back then. I couldn't use the paper passbook anymore, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, for some reason. The last entry in the passbook was precisely when the balance was at its highest, $500,000. My stepmother, who found the passbook, must have been delighted. Coincidentally, the unused personal seal was also stored together. If there were both the passbook and the personal seal in the back of the closet, it wouldn't be surprising for her to misunderstand that I had kept them safe. Simultaneously, without saying a word to me, my husband and mother-in-law, who are trying to purchase a new house, using someone else's savings without permission, I felt it was the perfect timing for revenge. Afterward, I refrained from discussing the finances, and instead, I coldly watched my husband and mother-in-law as they happily celebrated the purchase of the new house. Unaware of anything, my husband and mother-in-law had signed a contract with a housing manufacturer, so I decided to ask them, "Are you perhaps relying on my savings to finance the purchase of the new house?" I suddenly brought it up. And while my husband was flustered, my mother-in-law answered with a smile, "The wife's money is everyone's in the family. It's only natural, so don't ask such things." With a smile that could rival my mother-in-law's, I retorted, "I'll give you that passbook. Please feel free to use it as you." My husband, who I thought would get angry, was taken aback, so I also said to him, "I can't live with you anymore. Please divorce me." Immediately, I confronted my husband with the divorce papers I had prepared. In place of my shaken husband, it was my mother-in-law who spoke up. "Just because we're getting divorced doesn't mean I'll return that bank book. I told you I wouldn't give it back, and now it's too late," she said with a malicious expression. Ignoring my mother-in-law's spiteful glare, I had my husband sign the divorce papers, and I left the house with the papers and the packed belongings I had prepared. Returning to my parents' home, I explained the whole situation to my mother and brother. As expected, they were both angry, but for me, I was looking forward to what would happen between my husband and mother-in-law from now on. Despite signing a contract to purchase a new house, thinking they had $500,000, in reality, they only had an unusable bank book and couldn't withdraw a single cent. I wonder how they'll manage future payments. About half a year after the divorce, I received a panicked phone call from my ex-husband. "Violet, I can't use that bank book anymore for some reason. And it seems like the seal is different too. What's going on?" Suppressing my laughter, I calmly pretended and replied, "Well, that paper bank book, I switched to an online bank account, so it's no longer usable. Besides, there are only about $100,000 left in that account. Why would I let you, my ex-husband, use it?" Seemingly in a great rush or confusion, my ex-husband couldn't comprehend what I was saying, and instead, his mother picked up the phone. "We have to pay for the new house. Bring the money quickly." Facing the heated ex-mother-in-law, I coldly retorted, "I said I would give you the bank book, but I never said I would give you money. Why should I have to bring the money?" On the other end of the phone, I could hear the ex-mother-in-law's frustration, but all that came through was a growling sound. After hanging up, I turned off my smartphone and never answered any more calls from my ex-husband. The newly built house was completed, and when it came time for payment, the couple finally learned the fact that their passbook was unusable. The ex-husband returned to his parents' house, taking on multiple part-time jobs, in addition to his main occupation to come up with the money for the house purchase. It seems that the ex-mother-in-law also increased her part-time work, but the repayment progress is slow. Since the responsible person didn't properly check the passbook, they might be held accountable by the company. To make matters worse, the ex-husband's part-time jobs were exposed, and it seems he lost his job as well. For the two of them who stole things without permission and tried to use them only for themselves, it's just desserts. The two part-time workers are burdened with a large amount of debt and have reached a desperate situation. Having returned to my parents' house, I live leisurely without worrying about my belongings being stolen by my mother-in-law. I am grateful to the bank clerk who advised me to switch to a web passbook. If I had stayed with the paper passbook, by now, my father's inheritance might have been used without permission. However, the panic in their voices over the phone was truly laughable. It's so delightful that it can wash away the frustration of 2 years of marriage life.
We're such good friends that we can talk about anything, my daughter-in-law and I. Can we really? You're the only one talking. That's wrong, isn't it? That's how you maintain appearances. Stop trying to cover things up. With such a layer of deceit, a stage built upon lies like that will collapse sooner or later. Since my father-in-law passed away, in order to fulfill my mother-in-law's request, "Is it okay if we live together?" I nodded to my husband's words. The actions and words of my mother-in-law were more problematic to my husband than me. Even so, my kind husband was moved by my mother-in-law's words, "I'm lonely." It seems his feelings were stirred. As for me, I wanted to respect my husband's feelings. But as far as I can tell from the stories my husband has told me, she doesn't seem to do anything decent. It would be nice if she grew up a bit. My hopes of that were dashed on the day we started living together. She betrayed them easily. Suddenly, under the pretext of discipline, she began to use violence. When I was cooking, my mother-in-law,
"Your cutting method is incorrect."
She slapped my hand that was holding the knife. That's too dangerous, isn't it? While holding a knife, who slaps someone's hand? What if you make a mistake? My mother-in-law's dangerous behavior didn't stop there. When I was ironing,
"What is with your ironing method?"
"You're not doing it correctly." And then she slapped my hand that was handling the iron. It's not as dangerous as a knife, but it's still dangerous. In both cases, if I resisted poorly, it seemed she would become more dangerous and violent. I had no choice but to endure, and my mother-in-law became more and more assertive. The most dangerous situation was when I was vacuuming the corridor on the second floor. My mother-in-law,
"You can't even vacuum properly."
pretended to take the vacuum cleaner from me and bumped into me, trying to push me down the stairs. Before I fell down the stairs, I somehow managed to twist my body and fell on my backside in the hallway, which saved me. Her actions are too impulsive. Regardless of sympathy or anything else, my husband, who decided to live together, must have thought it would be bad if my mother-in-law's bullying me was exposed. In front of my husband, she's as meek as a borrowed cat. In my opinion, her trust value from my husband is already close to zero, so even if she pretends to be innocent, it would be useless if I report what she has done to me. However, given the current situation, when I consider my husband's feelings about deciding to live together, I feel sorry, and I couldn't speak out. Such an indecisive attitude of mine, I believe, has certainly emboldened my mother-in-law. Otherwise, such a poor cook wouldn't be able to give me any advice. She thinks steamed clams and sake is a dish boiled in alcohol. That's what kind of person she seems to be. "Go," I wanted to ask. She threw the clams into a pot full of sake and boiled them. When she served that as steamed clams and sake, I was truly surprised. It seemed she didn't taste it. It tasted quite disappointing. I can't help but sympathize when I think that my husband has been fed such things since he was a child. I just can't help feeling sorry. Even the amount of seasonings is so arbitrary. Depending on the dish, she might cook while referring to a cookbook, but whether it says tablespoon or teaspoon, she always uses the same spoon. But it's better when she uses a spoon. Most of the time, she pours directly from the seasoning container, without measuring the quantity. There's no way the flavor can be consistent that way. She even tries to fry things starting from a low temperature, so it gets mushy. It's really soggy. I try to point it out as kindly as possible, but my mother-in-law says,
"This is our family's tradition,"
and stubbornly refuses to improve her cooking skills. Given such a statement, all I can say
is, "Oh, is that so?"
I couldn't say anything else. If I say more, she'll get angry. Especially when my husband isn't around. If I don't handle my counterattacks carefully, I think the damage will just get worse. I can't afford to say anything reckless. After all, she even tried to push me down the stairs. The issue of her poor cooking skills could be solved if I cook instead, but the risk of her direct attacks needs some kind of solution. Living separately would be the safest option, but that might also mean denying my husband's kindness, and I'm increasingly unsure of what to do. But then my mother-in-law does something that just blows away all my doubts. When my mother-in-law puts on a nice face, I thought she only did it for my husband, but she does it for relatives and neighbors as well. She acts as if she's such a peaceful person, and starts saying things like, every time she talks to someone, "We're so close, we can talk about anything." She tells such lies without a hint of remorse. I've been subjected to all kinds of verbal abuse, even violence, and I put up with it all along. All I did was give advice about cooking. At the very least, we're certainly not so close that we can talk about anything. In fact, I'm almost at the point. I'm nearly driven to the point where I can't say anything. If I hadn't managed to fall on the spot, as my mother-in-law wished, I might have fallen down the stairs. And then, even if I wanted to speak my mind, I wouldn't have been able to, you know. That could have been a possibility. My mother-in-law's lies really infuriate me. Fine. If she wants a relationship where we can say anything to each other, let's have a relationship where we can say anything. I don't care if she regrets it. It's not my problem if she regrets it. But still, fighting silently with my mother-in-law might trouble my husband, so I think I'll.
Sorry, darling, I might end up having a conflict with your mother.
Just giving you a heads up. Normally I'm quiet, so him hearing me say such things must have seemed odd. My husband raised his eyebrows in surprise. Then, with a little smile, "Fine, but don't push yourself. If things get tough, you can ask for help right away, okay?" He asked me to promise. Feeling like I had gained reinforcements, I nodded firmly. Starting from the very next day, I began to counterattack my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, approaching me as I was cooking, exclaimed, "How many times do I need to say it?" Just as she was about to bully me, I flashed the kitchen knife at her.
Eek!
She let out a short shriek and tried to back away, but I swiftly stepped on her foot, blocking her retreat, and said, "Mother-in-law, you tried to hit my hand again, didn't you? When I'm using a knife, you should know. It's dangerous to do something like that, right?" I continued, moving the knife closer to her. I was doing something far more dangerous, but for now, I put that fact aside and said exactly what I wanted to without holding back. My mother-in-law turned pale and nodded shakily. Satisfied, I stepped off her foot, and she fell backwards in a graceless heap. On another day, in the pot where I was simmering a dish, she stuck in her chopsticks, attempting to take a sneak bite. I slapped her hand away swiftly, causing her to drop the chopsticks. "Please do not behave so disgracefully as to eat from the pot," I scolded her. Instead of snitching someone else's cooking, I wish she would taste her own dishes. That's what I want from my mother-in-law. Then she might be able to cook something that tastes a bit more decent. Because she never learns, even after all this. While I was ironing, she approached and poked my shoulder, saying,
Aren't you doing the ironing all wrong?
She always finds something to criticize. I grabbed my mother-in-law's extended arm, yanked it hard and pulled her down. In front of my fallen mother-in-law, the iron stood imposingly.
Eek!
She let out another short shriek, and tried to back away on all fours. I grabbed her collar and immobilized her. Leaning close to my mother-in-law's ear, "Listen, mother-in-law. I'm currently using the iron, you see. Understand? If you accidentally touch the iron, you could get burned, right? If you were to bump into it, it could be dangerous, wouldn't it?" I said it to her, like scolding a child. Even here, my mother-in-law nodded many times, as if trembling. Until now, I've never opposed my mother-in-law, you see. But now, every time I do something, it comes back at me. It seems she's genuinely feeling fear. The way she looks at me, it's as if she's seeing a monster or something. But this is what my mother-in-law wished for. A relationship where we can say anything to each other. You're happy, aren't you? Just as you wished for. Whether it was because my mother-in-law was upset, it seemed like she couldn't make a reasonable decision, and instead of letting it go, she turned to my husband,
Your wife is bullying me,
and cried for help. Unfortunately for her, I've already talked to my husband. No matter how much she tries to fabricate the story, my husband won't lend her an ear. In the first place, I wonder if she has forgotten what kind of treatment she's been giving her own son. My mother-in-law often throws tantrums and keeps slapping my husband. Even though her husband scolds her every time, it's a bad habit of hers that has never improved. Moreover, from what I heard from my husband, what I especially found repugnant was, when my husband was in the lower grades of elementary school, he bought carnations with his saved pocket money and presented them to his mother. She slapped his hand, made him drop the carnations, and scolded, "How dare you spend money
on something that will wither so soon?"
Then she reportedly slapped his face several times. Yeah. She hasn't changed at all from the mother-in-law I know. I love my husband, but showing kindness to my mother-in-law was a mistake, I think. She's the worst. My husband, who coldly looks down at his wailing mother, says my wife wouldn't do anything to someone who hasn't done anything to her. You must have said something sarcastic or hit her, didn't you? And he jumps to conclusions. My mother-in-law turns red in the face and protests, "I didn't hit her face or anything like that.
I only lightly slapped her hand."
And she nonchalantly confesses her violence. My husband shouts,
"So you did hit her?"
And she turns pale again. It was a little bit of leading questioning, but she fell for it without hesitation. My husband doesn't particularly like his mother in the first place, nor did he decide to live together with her. He seems pretty fed up with the fact that her violent tendencies have not improved at all. Here I reveal my feelings and say, "When we started living together, you said, 'This is discipline,' didn't you? But to me, it felt nothing less than bullying. It was extremely stressful. Stress can even affect pregnancy, you know? In the environment that you create, I don't have the confidence to show you the face of your grandchild." I expose my feelings. Tears started to fall as I spoke. But it seemed that my mother-in-law did not like what I was saying.
"Ha! Don't you dare blame me for not being able to have children. Even though you're nothing more than a good-for-nothing daughter-in-law. I'm the one who's getting stressed here. If you have a problem, just leave."
She hurled these words at me. To this, my husband responded, "Fine. We will leave as you wish. We moved in because you insisted, but you have the audacity to insult my wife. We will never live with you again," he declared. In a panic, the mother-in-law exclaims, "Wait!
You've got it all wrong. I was talking to the daughter-in-law, you know? Not to you."
But her son dismisses her claim, saying it's the same thing. He doesn't entertain her objections. The mother-in-law shrieks in exasperation and raises her hand at him out of old habit, but her son isn't the little boy he used to be. He's significantly taller and stronger than her now. The son coldly looks down on his mother. Her raised hand drops, losing its target, and her eyes dart around restlessly. The son sighs and says, "In the end, Mom, you haven't changed at all. I was hoping you might have improved a bit, but I was clearly too optimistic." He then takes me into the bedroom. Behind us, the mother-in-law cries out, "How cruel!" But no matter how much she protests, it's too late to change anything now. Because my husband has decided to leave, we'll start looking for a new home tomorrow and begin packing our things, so we'll likely be quite busy. But knowing that we'll be free from my mother-in-law, my heart feels incredibly light. Busyness? It's a small price to pay. Until we left the house, my mother-in-law tried to emotionally manipulate my husband, and even tried to intimidate me, attempting in every way possible to prevent us from moving out. She pulled out all the stops, but not once did she try apologizing for everything that's happened. This only confirmed our belief that even if we continued to live with her, she would just repeat the same behaviors. Because her interference was all talk, we managed to move without any issues. We didn't tell her our new address, so there have been no surprise visits, allowing us to quietly make a fresh start. That's where we are now.